I am Dr. Ed Emmer. I am the Elementary Science and Health Content Coordinator for Richland School District 2. I grew up in the suburbs outside of New Orleans, Louisiana, specifically in Metairie, which is just a small, it's one of those things like you say you grow up in Irmo, you really grow up in, you're in Columbia. People who don't live in the area don't quite know it. And I always knew that I had family members who were in education, even before I considered taking the path of education myself. My grandmother, Lucille, we called her Mama. I only ever knew her as Mama. Mama was a teacher in the Orleans Parish Public School System in the 50s and 60s. My godfather, Big Edwin, who I called Daba. I haven't said that in a long time. Big Edwin was a teacher and high school teacher in the public school system in Orleans Parish. My uncle Rodney was a college educator. He taught at LSU, Louisiana State University, and others. So don't hold that against me, Gamecocks fans. I always knew that I had connections to that. What I didn't know until much later in life was that my godfather, Big Edwin, and Mama were both in ways involved in the events that occurred in New Orleans at the time of the court-ordered integration of the public school system, during which Ruby Bridges was integrated, I guess, or given the opportunity to attend the previously whites-only elementary school. As you can see in the picture, the Norman Rockwell picture depicted here behind me, I didn't realize growing up, I would often go to Big Edwin's Daba's house in New Orleans and didn't even realize that he lived right down the street from this school. It was just something that wasn't talked about, something that I think my family was a part of, but didn't feel like they had to take pride and communicate that. It was just, they did what they did because that was who they were and who they are. I found out much later that Mama was one of the few white teachers who stayed at that elementary school when the majority of the other faculty and staff left in protest to the order for Ruby Bridges to be allowed to attend that school. While she wasn't Ruby Bridges' teacher, she taught one of the only remaining white students whose parents allowed her to continue to go to that school, despite the protests of the community and the terrible things that the community said about the actions that were taking place, about Ruby Bridges, about the teachers who were the few who still stayed, and about the few families that still had their students, their children, their white children go to that school with Ruby Bridges. Sadly, integration didn't end, even though the school had Ruby Bridges attending it. She did not attend classes with the few other white students who were there. So Mama never taught Ruby Bridges, but she was there at the time. I remember once I did learn about this, Pops told us, my dad, Pops, Jacob Emmer, told us how this gave Mama an ulcer, the stress of all of that and having to endure the threats, which I don't want to pretend were even equal to the terrible things that Ruby Bridges and her family likely had to endure. But my grandfather, whom I never met, Rodney, who my uncle was named for, made Mama drive the big family sedan. It was the lesser value of the two cars they had at the time, and the one that was sturdier because they anticipated that the car was going to be vandalized. And it used to tickle Pops, this image of Mama, who was a somewhat of a diminutive person behind the wheel of this huge, bulky sedan driving into the neighborhood, to the school, amid the threats being made against her for continuing to believe that it was important to stay at that school and educate the students who were coming there, few though they were at the time. Big Edwin Daba was also a part of what was happening at the time He was at the school board level. I don't know if he was part of the district office level or as a teacher there advocating for, but he was making noise to push for all of the schools in Orleans Parish School District to have access to the same resources as opposed to the segregated schools, the black schools, only getting the hand-me-downs, only getting the used textbooks, the old textbooks, the out-of-date textbooks. And he was there fighting at the district office level for every school in the school district. And this would have been prior to the beginnings of integration. To have access to those same resources. He believed that every student who went through there deserved the same resources. These were some things I learned about later about my family. It doesn't surprise me to know these things. I wish I'd known them more when these people were still with me and I could have asked them about it. Unfortunately, I learned about these things after they had passed. But it's funny, you learn the things about your family's history and sometimes long after, and at the time, you wonder if they realized the significance of the events that they were part of. They certainly never made a big deal out of them after the fact because I would have probably learned about them sooner. But it fills me with a sense of pride to know that I had family who were part of these things and who I'd like to feel we're on the right side of history with these things. And I only hope that what I do here in Richland School District 2 measures up in even a small part compared to what Mama and what Big Edwin were doing at a time when their actions were quite literally placing their lives and the lives of my family in harm's way for taking the right stand.